Chapter 55, Cups and Swords. Cups and Swords. Frithha stood watching the warm blonde head moving away from her through the swarms of people that usually occupied the bridge, the girl smiling as Simon looked back to send her one last wave before he finally disappeared into the crowds. He was a nice boy, well, young man really, for she was sure he was of her age or at least the equivalent, even if he did not act it. The squire was so full of talk and warm enthusiasm, and at first she could hardly believe it was as he had said, that he had practically grown up within the order's disciplined halls. But then the conversation had come around to the subject of the campaigns he had served on, and he had so reminded her of Anomen and Kuldorn that she had almost laughed, the squire holding that same earnest passion when it came to fighting against the wrongs of the world. Frithha was still smiling when she pushed open the door of the Five Flagons, the tavern quiet and experiencing the usual lull between noon and sundown. A few people were scattered at tables about the room, while at the bar, Wyn and Mayen, two of the women from the troupe, were sat side by side enjoying a quiet cup of wine, heads in close as they talked. They were both blonde and tanned and similar enough in looks that Frithha had used to get them mixed up in their first few days at the theatre. Samuel was at his usual place behind the bar, but his attention was not on the women, the halfling instead looking at the scrawny dark-haired boy who had just placed a tray on the counter.
"Right, Samuel, I've been sent for another pitcher o'
ale and 2 bottles o' wine. They've already got cups from last time though.
And Higgold is asking after you too, Wyn, so I'd not be much, oh, lady patron."
Mek greeted, finally noticing her approach.
"A good day to you, m'lady." "Oh, yes, good day lady patron,"
came Mayen quickly, Wyn sending her a polite nod that made her blonde curls bob, trying to discreetly swallow her mouth full of wine. Frithha smiled.
"Hello Mek. Wyn, Mayen, Samuel." "Ah, lady patron, a good day indeed,"
the landlord greeted, beaming at her.
"I believe I had some friends of yours in here but a few days ago." "Oh yes,"
prompted Frithha, her curiosity piqued.
"3 young minstrels came a 10 days ago asking if I'd a mind to having some music in here of an evening. I gave them a try since they said they came with your recommendations, and I am most pleased I did. A shame you missed them, for they raised the roof. I've them booked in for another performance a 10 days hence. They had some friends with them as well, who said they knew you and the young lady Nalia."
Frithha was suddenly smiling. She knew exactly who Samuel was speaking of as he continued.
"Nice lads, they were, Adric, Thalen, Olwen, and some sot lad. Now, what was his name?"
"Cassis," offered Frithha with a light laugh, and she wondered if the poor boy hadn't been quarreling with his lady again.
"Aye, that was it. They asked after you, of course. I told them you were out of the city at present."
The halfling grinned innocently.
The lad, Olwen, seemed especially disappointed.
Wyn and Mayen began giggling into their sleeves, Mek rolling his eyes at the pair, and Frithha laughed, both at their amusement and Mek's disdain.
"Well, I'm sure he'll survive,"
she countered dryly. Wyn glanced to Mayen with a sly smile, the young woman clearly feeling bolder now. She was sure Frithha was not going to scold them for sneaking upstairs.
"Well, he clearly doesn't think so, m'lady, he's been back twice since then."
Yet more laughter, Frithha joining the 2 women, though it felt distinctly more forced this time, her face burning. Olwen was a very nice young man from what she could recall of him, but she felt uncomfortable with the idea of him thinking about her or trying to meet her. That night she had met him, she had almost been a different person, free from the cares and responsibilities that usually hung upon her. Would he be as keen to meet her again knowing she was a mercenary? That she was currently planning to cross one of the most powerful mage guilds in all of Om? Frithha doubted it.
"Wyn? Mayen?
called a voice from the stairwell, and the both girls jumped in their seats, hastily finishing their drinks before hurrying back downstairs, their absence finally noticed, it seemed. Samuel watched them go, clearing their cups from the bar before bustling off into the back room for Mech's wine. Frith sighed, moving from the bar to take a nearby table and beckoning to the young boy they had left.
Come on then, Mech, tell me everything that's been going on, better I hear all the bad news from one sensible source. Well, first off, and I don't suppose it's any o'
my business, but I think you should know that Olwyn lad's been back more than just twice. I caught him anging around the stage door a few days back, and he offered me a gold piece to come and tell
him when you had returned to the theatre.
The young boy straightened proudly in his chair, but, I told him, I am an employee of the theatre and as such cannot be chasing around the city on personal errands, though if you would want me to take a message to
m'lady, I'm sure I could easily find. No,
Frith interrupted hastily,
that will not be necessary. So, what else has been happening?
Mech gave her a grim look.
Well, I know for a fact what
Higgold will want to talk to you about today. I and the rest o' them are in a tiss at the moment because there were a run o' accidents in the theatre a 10-day or so back, just small stuff, like a can o' paint got split over one o' the new backdrops and Jenna nearly tripped over during rehearsals. Anyways, that old idiot Ketrick started harping on about the curse that's supposed to be on the play again, and instead o' everyone telling him to shut it like they do normally, they went and got all twitchy and now they're all dropping things and tripping over and jumping at their own shadows as they whisper about that stupid curse. Frith sighed deeply.
Oh great! Anything else?
The boy shook his head.
Nah, not really, m'lady. Zurin keeps changing.
Is lines from the script, but Higgold's just left him to it so far. And Althea was threatening to walk a few days ago when one of our scenes got cut. But I just told that I'd heard Higgold thinking about letting Mayan
obey her part because she was causing so much bother. Higgold was really contemplating on letting Althea go,
exclaimed Fritha. To say she was surprised was a bit of an understatement, especially when the director seemed to spend so much of his time trying to placate the haughty actress. Mech gave a bark of impish laughter.
Nah, I just made it up, but she shut up about threatening to go afterwards. You ain't angry, are you?
He added, suddenly worried. But Fritha just shrugged.
Not particularly. After all, it worked, didn't it? Half the time I'm just guessing at this too, you know.
Mech looked rather impressed. Yeah, well.
Higgold lets them get away with too much, especially that Althea. What they don't understand is that none o' it matters. Who cares who's got the biggest dressing room or the most lines? If the play's no good, you'll kick us all out and then we'll have nout.
Fritha smiled and nodded. For all his youth, the boy had a sensible head on his shoulders, seemingly a rarity amongst the troupe. He could likely make a sound career as a director himself when he was older.
Just how old are you anyway, Mech? About 8.
The boy shook his head again.
Nah, 10 winters this flame rule just passed, or so my ma told me. I know I'm small for my age. Yes, well, I know that feeling,
said Fritha dryly, and Mech grinned.
So, how did you come to work for Higgold? Just fell into it, really. I never knew my day, but from what my ma would say, that were no loss. But she died a couple o'
years ago, and I've just had to look after meself since. I worked for a street gang for a bit. We had digs in some abandoned ooze just up from the docks. There were an old row o' them. It used to be some sort o' a factory, I think, before it were converted to oozes, stank to igh even in the summer, but it were an alright place to keep the night. Our gang, we weren't into anything too bad, just picking pockets and the like, but I never got into it. I felt guilty taking things that weren't mine. The others 'd just laugh it off, said they 'ad coin and deserved it, but I would think about how I'd feel, if I made something o' meself and then someone came and robbed me for my hard-earned coin. I'd be livid.
When I first met
Higgold I were actually eyeing him up as a mark, but he saw me looking and called me across to him. It were clear he were new to the city. He said he were in a rush for a meeting and he promised me a copper piece if I took him to the 5 flagons. I did o' course, who were I to argue with easy coins in the purse? I don't know what made me wait outside for him. Perhaps I figured he might need a guide somewhere else. Well, when he came out, he were all flustered and smiling. He saw me there outside and came over, bold as day, and said he was to be a director at the theatre beneath the tavern and how would I like to be in and there and help
him run errands and gather together his troop.
Frithia smiled, so Higgold might have been stretching the truth a touch when he said his troop was newly formed.
And I've been there ever since, m'lady,
Mech continued, a hint of pride on his young face. I get my board in the theatre and 9 coppers a week as wage, though
Higgold keeps 5 o' them to make sure I've something saved. Are you sure you ain't mad with me, m'lady?
He asked again, looking wary, as though worried her inquiries were with an eye to checking his suitability for her service, and Frithia smiled.
Quite sure. Now go and take those drinks down before they die of thirst and send Higgold up to see me. I've something important to discuss with him.
A no-man glanced up as the city bells struck 2 and the door of the coronet at last swung open to reveal the one he had been waiting for. Their small group had lingered after Frithia had left with Simon, his friends talking amiably together while he had gone into the Temple of Helm to give thanks, and though they had not been in the tavern half an hour, he was relieved to see Frithia returned nonetheless. Truth be told, he was nervous about what Simon could have told the girl in his absence, and a no-man was glad to see that she was at least smiling as she finally joined their table, a cup of wine already in her hand.
So, my lady,
he began nonchalantly once she was seated,
what did you and Simon find to talk about on your walk to the bridge?
Frithia blinked a moment at the unexpected question before.
Oh, well, you actually...
A no-man felt his stomach lurch.
Me?
The girl laughed lightly.
Well, to start with anyway. We just spoke of how pleased we were for you, and then I asked about when Simon hoped to be knighted, and he asked about trade meet, and by then we were at the theatre. And how does the lady patron?
Asked Jahara with a smile, and Frithia shook her head.
Patron? Ha! It's like I'm their mother!
She cried, still smiling as she pretended to scold a child next to her.
Ilthea! Did you just pull Jenna's hair? Well, don't. And Jenna, do stop crying, it wasn't that bad. Marcus, now just leave that aloe, leave it. Now you know how I felt when you and Imoen first joined us,
commented the druid dryly.
Yes,
Frithia agreed, nodding earnestly.
And what an example we were set. I recall one night in the Nashkel Inn, you and Dinah Hare. Point taken,
interrupted Jahara, suddenly very pink, though she laughed along with the rest of them.
We've just ordered some food,
offered Ari, still smiling.
We didn't think you would be back so soon. I can ask the maid to come back though, if you would like something.
Frithia shook her head.
Oh, thank you, but I'm not really hungry to be honest, I'll have something later.
Across the table, Jahara sighed audibly.
I had all that rice for breakfast,
offered Frithia quickly, the woman sending her a stern look.
Yes, over 6 hours ago. Oh, do what you will.
The druid sighed when it became clear Frithha was not going to back down.
You always were stubborn about such things. I'm not stubborn.
Frithha snapped through. It was drowned out by Minsk's great booming laugh.
Ha! It is so. Who wonders if you remember the voyage back from Baldur's island? By Sylvanus, I do.
The druid cried, the stern glare back on Frithha.
10 days worth of sailing and only enough food rations for half that. And you, nearly worrying poor Khalid sick, refusing a bite. You did not eat?
A Noman confirmed, unable to hide the amazement in his voice, Frithha nodding mildly.
Not for the first few days, no. Oh, don't attribute it to any great nobility on my part.
She assured with a laugh at his no doubt odd expression, before the smile faded slightly, her eyes gaining a distant look.
I just wasn't hungry. But on the last day. Yes,
agreed the ranger, giving the girl a fond smile.
Minsk remembers, Boo on one knee, young Frithha's head resting upon the other, and the last of my way bread shared between them.
Frithha grinned.
I've dined with Grand Dukes and Guild Masters since then, and that was still the best meal I've ever had.
Minsk laughed again, clapping the girl's back as Ari asked conversationally,
What were you doing on the island in the first place? I thought you would have been busy trying to stop the Iron Throne.
Frithha nodded, smiling wryly.
Yes, but at the time they were ahead by one move and had just framed us for murder. We were laying low just north of Baldur's Gate in a fishing village, Ulgath's Beard, when we were hired to investigate the wreck of a boat on a small island believed to be Baldur's final resting place.
Frithha paused to take another sip of wine, Jahara taking up the story.
Which it was, but that was not the only thing on the island. We sailed to the place and were shipwrecked ourselves, only to find the island quite inhabited by 2 tribes of werewolves. 2 whole tribes of werewolves!
Exclaimed Cerned.
How interesting, and I assume these were the werewolves that you mentioned during Faldern's ravings.
Jahara nodded.
Indeed, though we did not know of their true nature at the time. One group had formed a small village while the others lived in the wreck we were supposed to be salvaging from. The leader of the village, Cassius, told us her people had long wished to leave the island and had built a boat for the purpose, but it could only be launched from the east side of the island where the reef did not stretch, which was unfortunately where the other tribe of werewolves had made their home. How the fates do love to toy with us,
laughed Herr Dallas. Minsk nodded wisely, straightening in his chair to continue the tale.
Frithha led us to them and tried to parley, though they would not heed her, and a great fight broke out. Their leader, Karug, was slain and the werewolves subdued. We were victorious, but we returned to the village only to find ourselves betrayed. They needed maps as well as a boat to leave the island, maps which we had. We were cursed with lycanthropy tie us to them, but not all were pleased with this course. Cassius escaped to the boat while the rest of the village hunted us down.
A Noman drew a sharp breath.
By helm, how did you escape? Well.
Minsk trailed off, looking suddenly unsure of himself, the man glancing to Jahara, who glanced in turn to Frithha, the girl finishing another sip of wine with an even shrug.
We chased after Cassius, avoiding the other villagers where we could, and reached the boat just in time to stop her and leave ourselves. I know it sounds quite simple.
She continued in the silence that followed, her words something of an anticlimax after the drama of the build-up,
but, at the time, I actually wondered if we would even make it through the night. So that's why you were so frightened of those illusions of werewolves back when Kala had taken over the circus,
came Ari with a gasp of realization.
I remember you just seemed to freeze.
Frithha smiled faintly.
Yes, for a moment I was back on that island and the memories were not pleasant ones. Right, can I clear some room here?
Came a voice above them, and an omen turned to see the maid, a large dish of grilled fish balanced on one hand as she used the other to try and make room for it amongst their cups and jugs. Fritha downed the last of her wine, made her excuses and left. Fritha closed her door and paused a moment, leaning back against the wood, just enjoying the silence of her empty room. Though she had pretended otherwise, their talk of Baldur's Isle had been hard, memories she usually left forgotten sudden brought to the fore. But perhaps it was for the best, remembrances of the man she had lost there helping her to come to terms with the thing. Fritha sighed deeply, feeling a dull ache just under her ribs. Or perhaps not. She had ordered a bath along with her drink, though that would not arrive for a while yet, and she tried to use the opportunity to catch up on some sleep. But the rest she sought would not come, the stillness about her merely allowing these stirred thoughts a chance to flourish, Duralile death, Imoen's ongoing absence and other worries haunting her like hungry ghosts. And when she had finally drifted off, she was awoken not much later by a knock at the door, the maid arriving with a small tin tub and towels before disappearing off again with a friendly assurance that she would not be long in returning with her water. Fritha shut the door with a sigh and moved over to her bag, crouching over it to take out fresh clothes before crossing to the mirror to strip. It always surprised her how many layers she was wearing. It shouldn't really, since she had put them all on, but still tunic, trousers, shirt, chemise, stockings, and shorts, and finally the jadestone Imoen had given her and she was done, stood before the mirror pale and slight and naked, well hidden by the hair that hung about her like a coat. She smiled faintly at herself, quite liking the effect and absently pleased she didn't get the opportunity for such very often. She had an inkling she could become rather vain, given half a chance. Fritha smiled, fetching up a towel from the bed behind and wrapping it about her twice before turning back to the glass. Real mirrors had been rare in Candlekeep, and she had not even had one of her own until Beth had given her the bronze hand mirror she still carried with her now. But the image within that was dull and imperfect and invoked none of the wonder of a looking glass, of that echoed world just out of reach of her own. The only real mirror she knew of had been the huge one that stood above the ornate fireplace in the Peers' library, so high it reflected nothing but the dusty tops of the bookshelves, and she still had to climb on a chair to look into it when she was fully grown. Fritha smiled. One of her earliest memories of Candlekeep was of Taith O'Reilly, brown-haired and beardless, holding her up with a small casting mirror to show her the endless tunnel of worlds that sprang from it, all hidden until a mirror was shown another. It was only a short time later she learned the reality of reflections from Gorion, but learning the science hadn't diminished the mystery of the thing, and Fritha had been fascinated by mirrors ever since. She turned back to the mirror before her, the room beyond the glass a fascinating replica of the one she stood in. The world seemed so real, so perfect, and she lost herself in the idea that she could somehow climb inside and the girl within could take her place out there for just a few days. She watched the girl now, staring back at her, just as tired, just as weary. Perhaps she was thinking the exact same thing. The glass is always greener. She allowed herself a half smile at the joke, before turning away to fetch out the last of her soap and her hairbrush, preparing herself for the inevitable knock at the door. Only, when it came, it was not the maid.
"Oh, my raven, that girl!"
came the cry as soon as she had opened the door, the bard barging past her before she could halt him.
"Just guess what she has done now." "Herr Dallas!"
Fritha cried in a strangled voice, hands instantly flying to better secure her towel.
"You can't be in here, I'm about to have a bath."
But Herr Dallas looked supremely unconcerned by her state of undress, merely exclaiming,
"Another? I swear there are mermaids that see less water than you do. Are you sure you're not a water genasi?" "Positive." "Now you've got to Ellie, oh, hells!"
she swore as another knock at the door cut her off. Hairdalis looking more than amused as she stalked over to open it on 3 young maids, each holding a huge pitcher of water, steam rising from them in delicate tendrils.
"Your water, m'lady,"
came the foremost one politely, a knowing smile passing slyly between the 3 girls as they noticed the tiefling stood behind her.
"Yes, thank you, just go in,"
Fritha smiled tightly, stepping back to allow them past her and sending Hairdalis a furious look, her voice little more than a hiss as she ushered him out into the hallway.
"And if you still want to talk, wait for me downstairs."
The bard grinned.
"As you wish, my raven, enjoy your bath."
A gnome stood in the hallway, his heart beating heavily in his chest as he stared over at the dark unyielding wood of a door for the 2nd time that day. He was meeting Simon and the others at the Myth Rest Inn over in the promenade at sundown, and only one thing remained to be done. A gnome drew a deep breath and strode across to Fritha's door, a hand raised ready to knock, only for him to wheel about at the last moment and begin a nervous pacing. He had been mulling over the thought ever since Simon had given him the idea of inviting his companions along. It all sounded so simple in his head, trivial even, just invite Fritha to come out to a tavern with them. But it was not as simple as that in reality. Yes, he could knock and, yes, he could ask her to join him, but what would she read into it? What did he want her to read into it? And things were certain to get out of hand once Simon and the others were brought into the proceedings. A gnome shot the door another determined look, a fist held poised above the wood, before his nerve failed him again and he resumed his pacing, his mind keeping up a constant tirade at his ear. "Helm's mercy, just knock, you coward. Just knock on her door and ask her." But it wasn't quite as easy as that. Though he wasn't ready to admit it anyone but himself, he liked Fritha, really rather a lot, in fact. And though it was merely an invitation to join him and his friends in quiet drink, it felt like much more and his trepidation was almost palpable. "Come on, now." He turned swiftly and knocked before he could change his mind. A pause. A gnome could already feel his face growing hot, his mind going over and over what he was going to say to her, but it seemed he was not to have the chance.
"Oh hello, a gnome,"
came a voice behind him and he turned to see Ari stood in her doorway, her eyes red-rimmed as though she not long stopped crying.
"Are you looking for Fritha? Jahara said she saw her leaving for the theatre with Hairdalis."
"Oh," a gnome heard himself say, an unpleasant empty feeling yawning just under his ribs. Not only was she out with the tiefling.
"Oh, I see."
He knew he should offer some explanation to the elf, but he couldn't quite manage it.
"Thank you, Ari,"
he muttered, only propriety preventing him from immediately turning on his heel and trudging dejectedly off down the stairs.
"And you are, well."
The girl gave him a watery smile.
"Don't worry, a gnome, you don't have to pretend you haven't noticed. Hairdalis and I have had another quarrel. I don't even know what it was about now, we just can't see to help it at the moment." A gnome smiled weakly through his discomfort, such talk of emotions never resting well with him. "I am sure that it will pass, I hear tell that most couples suffer similar trials." "Do you think so?"
She wondered aloud, her blue eyes gaining a rather absent look.
I am not as sure, a gnome. I can't describe it. I love Hairdalis, but it feels like something is wrong. I try to ask about it but he says he does not sense the same. That I am looking for problems, perhaps I am."
She trailed off, glancing up and seemingly surprised to find him there, the girl looking uncomfortable.
"I am sorry, a gnome, I am keeping you."
"Not at all," he answered kindly. That his grand plans for the evening were now all for naught was a shame, but for all his disappointment, perhaps he could use the misfortune to try and cheer the elf.
I am actually going out drinking tonight with some friends,
he continued, smiling again and this time more strongly,
a celebration of my knighthood as it were. Simon has arranged it. I almost dread to think what he has planned, though you are welcome to join us if you wish.
Ari smiled gently, laying a hand on his arm as she shook her head.
Oh, Anomen, that is kind of you, but I think I shall just take some dinner and retire early.
Anomen nodded once, rather glad to see her looking at least a little happier.
As you would have it, my lady. A good evening to you.
Frithia and Herdalis dropped in briefly at the theatre, if only not to make liars of them, before heading to the docks where they began at one end of the quays and steadily worked their way along the taverns that lined the winding streets. It was dark outside, and though Frithia couldn't have made a guess at the hour, it felt late. Her lack of sleep the night before had finally caught up with her. The initial vigor she had felt when she had started drinking had definitely worn off by now, and her mind felt dull and heavy. They were in the Waterdeep Packet again, and Frithia recalled with a painful clarity the evening she had spent there with Nalia and the boys, dancing and laughing, though there was no music there tonight, the tavern quiet save for the low murmur of drinking patrons.
Here we are, my raven,
came a voice at her sleeve, Herdalis arriving back from the bar with 2 cups of dark red wine.
I thought we could go dancing after this. Dancing? Oh, no Herdalis, I'm tired. Then dancing is just what you need to wake you up. Come now, my raven.
He teased, playfully tugging her sleeve.
I never consider my evening complete until I have tripped a reel with a pretty bird. Oh, bugger off,
she huffed, fighting against a smile. But the bard just laughed. He knew he had won her over, they would go dancing. Frithia sighed, listlessly raising her cup to take a sip.
So what were you and Ari fighting about earlier anyway?
Herdalis sighed too.
Oh, everything and nothing. She accused me of being in a mood since I hadn't gone to the theatre with you. And were you?
Asked Frithia with a shrewd frown. Herdalis shrugged.
Not intentionally. So, she asked if I had wanted to go to the theatre and I told her it was so.
Frithia nearly choked on her wine.
You said yes. Well, I did wish to go with you,
he reasoned indignantly.
I had hoped she would focus instead upon the sacrifice I made to please her by returning with her to the inn.
Frithia frowned, shaking her head as she took another drink.
I don't think girls much like thinking that time spent with them is some sort of sacrifice. Well, it most certainly is when the girl in question is huffing and sighing about your room. Herdalis,
Frithia scolded tiredly,
she probably just wanted to spend some time alone with you now we were back in the city. It must have hurt when it became apparent you wanted to be elsewhere.
Herdalis nodded, looking grim.
Perhaps so, but where are we now? Both on other sides of the city and with further than that between our hearts.
Frithia didn't really have an answer for that, and the pair continued their drinking in silence, the girl letting her mind wander. Simon had mentioned something about taking Anomen somewhere that night to celebrate, and Frithia wondered whether they were having a more cheerful evening than she was. It was pretty likely.
I wonder what everyone is doing now,
sighed Frithia after a moment just to break the silence, and she was not really expecting an answer, though Herdalis had one for her anyway.
Well, Cerned and Ari will be telling each other how amazing nature is, and the knight will be telling everyone how amazing he is. Herdalis,
she reproached with a sigh,
just because you're in a sour mood. I happen to know for a fact that Cerned has no intentions of that sort towards your dove, and as for Anomen, he has worked hard to join the order. Just because it is not something either of us would want, doesn't make it any less of an achievement. I don't know why you dislike him so. Why? He is opposed to everything I am, all that I stand for and believe. And he likely thinks the same of you.
Dallas laughed.
I do not doubt it. But what do you think of him? What do I think? Well, I think he's a good sort. He can even be a laugh on those occasions he dismounts from his high horse and deigns to walk with the rest of us. He has been calmer lately too. I think he will find life a lot easier now he no longer feels compelled to prove himself. I had no idea you thought him such a catch,
muttered Dallas rather sourly, but Fritha just laughed.
Well, he has better prospects than us too. He will find himself a fair and dutiful wife, and he will travel around fighting what needs to be fought, and she will stay at home, bearing him valiant sons and accomplished daughters, and they will both consider it a life well lived.
She laughed again, taking a mouthful to add,
and I can't say I blame either of them.
Dallas shrugged, seemingly mollified.
And what will you do when we've rescued Imoen? I'm going to travel. This plane, others. There's a lot of world out there, and I have every intention of experiencing as much of it as I can.
Dallas sighed deeply, his look wistful in the lamplight.
Oh, why could I not have seen you then as I do now?
Fritha shook her head. They were getting into dangerous territory.
Oh, it's that time of the evening, is it? Where we mull over regrets of the past. We'd have made an awful couple, and you know it.
Even as the words left her mouth, she was not sure she really believed them, but there was no point in dredging all that up again, all that uncertainty and raw feelings. The past should stay past.
We are too similar,
she continued with conviction and a friendly smile.
If we had formed an alliance back then, we'd have got bored of each other, it would have fizzled out by now, and I would be sat here giving you advice on how to win Ari.
They both laughed at that, Dallas nodding slightly as he took a drink, and though Fritha couldn't tell whether or not he agreed with her, perhaps it was more important he knew what she thought about the matter. The bard was still smiling in that faintly wistful way, his eyes traveling unfocused on the tavern about them before coming to rest on her, and she felt a pang of loneliness, suddenly desperate to know that the decision to let him go she had made so long ago hadn't all been in vain. That he was happy, that he didn't truly regret how things had turned out.
Do you love her, Dallas?
He nodded slowly, his voice unusually quiet as his gaze dropped to the pitted tabletop.
My raven, more than the telling of it, though I try each day.
Fritha sank her head into her hands, almost despairing, wanting more than anything to just know how to fix it for him.
What could have gone so wrong? I can't believe it is just all these silly things you keep squabbling about. Would you like me to talk to her? I can probably convince her to tell me.
But Dallas just shook his head.
No, I will try to speak with her again on the morrow, for all the good it will do.
Fritha sighed deeply and drained her cup.
Another round.
Dallas finished his drink in one draught, setting it back on the table before him with a dull nod. A gnome weaved his way through the tables in the empty common room, only the most stalwart of patrons still there at that hour. Despite the disappointing start, he had rather enjoyed his evening, he and his friends visiting a few of the taverns in the promenade to make merry and celebrate his success. Before they had all called it a night, the men returning to their quarters at the order, while he walked the dark streets of the slums back to the coronet. Anoman had reached the stairs by now, the climb feeling much steeper than it did usually, and he was more than looking forward to reaching his bed when he heard a noise on the landing above him. He stopped, suddenly tense as he listened to the furtive whispering, when a familiar giggle rippled down the staircase and Anoman felt himself smile. He walked slowly up the last few steps into the corridor with already an idea of the scene that would greet him. Herdalis and Frithha stood in the gloom, both clearly well into their cups, laughing quietly and telling each other to shush as they tried to steal back into their rooms.
That may work better if you have the key the right way up, my lady. Anoman!
Cried Frithha happily, whirling to his voice, the girl instantly dissolving into whispery laughter as Herdalis hushed at her, the man clearly wanting to get into his room, which was unfortunately next to Ares, without waking the elf.
What are you doing still up?
Frithha continued quietly,
I'm sure it is well past your bedtime.
Anoman's smile broadened, feeling oddly warmed by her teasing.
I was out with my friends, my lady. We went to a few taverns in the promenade.
Herdalis had finally managed to open his door by now and was sidling through the gap with exaggerated movements, glancing back to offer the girl a parting smile.
Good night, my raven. Night,
she sighed in reply, looking, for a moment, sober in her melancholy before the giddy smile was back and she was returning her attention to him.
So, how are your friends, Anoman? Oh, and the lovely Simon. He mentioned earlier he was planning a celebration for you. Did you enjoy your evening?
Anoman smiled wryly.
Apparently not as much as you have been.
But Frithha just laughed.
Ah, same old Anoman, please feel free to scold away, I doubt I shall remember in the morning. Then I shall save my admonishments until then and settle for telling you of my evening as requested.
He gestured back along the corridor towards the staircase and Frithha smiled, the pair moving to sit on the topmost step where their talk wouldn't disturb the sleeping guests.
So how was your evening?
Asked Frithha again once they had settled.
Very enjoyable. We began at the Myth Rest, and then moved on to the Golden Scales, and ended our evening in the Goose and Grain. Oh, the Goose,
Frithha exclaimed, beaming, and he suspected she knew the place.
They usually have quite good musicians in there. Did you dance? Regrettably, no, I had no partner.
He smiled, his stomach tightening as he continued mildly,
so you and Herdalis went to the theatre?
Frithha nodded.
Yes, at first. Then we went to a tavern.
She added rather unnecessarily,
and then another and another and another. Then we went dancing. Herdalis wanted a sympathetic ear, though he had to make do with a paralytic one by the end of the evening. Poor man, still I think the singing cheered him up if nothing else. If you can't solve your problems, wailing about them to a jaunty tune is surely the next best thing. You were singing. But, of course.
She confirmed proudly.
All the way back from the docks, in fact. The drunken maudlin song is a grand tradition. The preferred topic is, of course, a lost or unrequited love, but ones about heroes that died bravely can also work well.
Anoman smiled, watching as Frithha closed her eyes and leant her head against the wall.
I would very much like to hear one. I bet you wouldn't once I had stared,
she answered with a snort of laughter, not even opening her eyes.
But either way, I can't now. You can only sing them as you make your way home. That's the rule. Then next time perhaps,
he pressed, trying to get back a glimmer of the cheerful girl he had first discovered there in the hall, but Frithha just sighed.
As you will,
she murmured, shifting slightly as she tried to get more comfortable against the cool wall. Anoman watched her fidget a moment, before finally asking the question that had been hanging over him for days now.
Fritha, this may seem an odd thing to ask, but, are you happy? Not just now, you understand, but in your life as a whole.
She opened her eyes and he watched her considering the question, the shadow of it flickering behind her eyes before she shrugged indifferently.
After a fashion.
She sighed, shaking her head as though to wake herself up and rising unsteadily.
Well, I'd best get to bed before I pass out here on the landing. Good night, Anomen.
Anomen swallowed and nodded once.
Good night, my lady.
And he watched as she moved swiftly to her door and unlocked it, her hand pausing on the handle as she turned back to him.
And I know I've said this before, but congratulations, Anomen, we're all really pleased for you.
Anomen said nothing, he couldn't quite find the words, and in the end she just smiled and opened her door.
Well, night.
Anomen watched her disappear before turning back, the stairs stretching down into the gloom before him, the bottom few illuminated by the faint glow from the tavern beneath. An awful weight seemed to be pressing on him, and he leaned against the wall as she had, staring unseeing into the darkness. He would have never before even risked being caught sat about in the hallway so improperly, but his view of the world and the rules which governed him had momentarily been forgotten. Because he understood what after a fashion meant. It meant no. End of chapter.